Hi, this is Craig from Ghost Hack. I'm going to be doing a series of videos looking for the best free VSTs available and testing them out and seeing what they can do. So the first one we're looking at is Tokyo Dawn Records Nova, which is a dynamic EQ. So this is a cross between EQ compression and multiband compression all in one. Looks really cool. It's available as 32-bit and 64-bit VST and AAX. So let's check it out. So I've got Nova loaded up into Studio One. One of the first things I've noticed is I have to move the mouse really far to get these knobs to respond. But by going in this little settings icon here and going from velocity base to linear and to 200%, I found personally that works a lot better. So we've got 4 bands of EQ, which can go between low shelf, bell and high shelf. Each of these 4 bands has a compressor built in, where we've got threshold going down to minus 50 decibels, ratio going from nothing to 10 to 1, and we've got fast attack and release times. The frequency goes from 10 Hz to 40k, so way beyond the range of human hearing. If we disable all the bands of EQ and enable threshold, it turns into a normal wideband compressor, which is also pretty cool. And we've also got high pass and low pass filters with variable slopes. Each of the compressors that we have on the bands all have dry mix as well and an out gain, so basically a makeup gain. With the dry mix, that's quite cool, so we can do parallel compression with the dynamic EQ as well. We've also got a spectrum analyzer, which we can switch between input, output, sidechain, or have it off. And we can use external sources of audio for sidechain detection for the compression in here as well, so that's super cool. So I've loaded up some samples from Ghost Hack's Liquid Essentials drum and bass sample pack. So these are the loops that I've got loaded up from the sample pack. They sound like this. So I've put a Nova on the bass to try to deal with some of the masking from the kick drum and snare drum so that they don't conflict. So what I've done is with the kick and snare, I've routed them via the sidechain to the bass insert of Nova. And then set this to external sidechain and also on the analyzer. And I've set up 2 bands in here. The first one being the kick drum. So whenever the kick drum plays, which you can see here, it's going to pull down that frequency range within the bass. It's quite subtle, but it just gives the bass and the kick drum a bit more room to breathe together. I did notice when using really fast attack times on here, unfortunately, it does bring in some artifacts and begin to click a little bit, which is a bit annoying, but I've also introduced this second band, which is where the snare is, doing the same thing. It's just pulling back whenever the snare plays. So it's quite subtle, but it just gives it a bit more room. If I have a look in Spans decibel meter, see if we can see any difference. Nova enabled, we're at peaking at minus 10.2 decibels, and then if I bypass it, even though it's quite subtle, we've gained some headroom there from pulling out those masking frequencies, which over a mix is going to give us more density and a louder mix down, so that's really cool. So we can try this on the pad as well. At the moment, the pad has got an EQ doing a low cut below 196 Hz, but there's a lot of mid-range in here, which is going to conflict with the snare drum. The snare drum at the moment is peaking around 500 Hz, so it's like right in the middle of all this. So let's see if we can make some space for it using Nova. So I'm going to get up an instance, turn it into external sidechain mode, analyze the sidechain mode, and then set up a trigger coming from this snare drum to the pad. So you can see the snare drum in the background. It's going to disable all these other bands and set this to 500 Hz. And enable the compression, turn the ratio up, make the release a bit faster, bring the Q up. Let's see what other difference they make together. So with them both enabled, we're peaking at around minus 8 decibels, and then if I bypass them, we've gained some headroom around 1.2 decibels on the left channel, a little bit more on the right. So you can imagine over a whole mix, using this as a technique to control conflicting frequencies in a really transparent way is a great way to gain headroom and clarity to a mix. Another way you can use Nova is to deal with frequency problems. So say for example you've got a chord progression and there's just one note or one chord where there's a really harsh frequency that stands out that you just want to control. If you use a conventional EQ and you find that frequency, let's just say it's at 5k, and you dial in some tight resonance and pull it back, the problem is now that the rest of that sound is being cut at that frequency range continuously. But with dynamic EQ, you can have it just so that it pulls back that frequency when the threshold is exceeded. So as an example of how much of a difference it can make, let's just say for whatever reason we wanted to bring down the level of the snare on this track. So I was to use a conventional EQ at 500 Hz. We're now making a big hole in the track, which is not great, and it's cutting a lot of frequencies out of everything else. But what we can do is use the dynamic EQ, pull down the snare when it exceeds this threshold. So even a small amount there, it makes quite a huge difference. And this is a great way, say for example you've got a drum recording or a break, and there's a section where the ride cymbal's too loud but you haven't got individual stems to mix from and you want to control the level of it. This is a great way you can do it without damaging the frequency range of the snare, etc. So it's a really powerful tool. I'd highly recommend giving it a go, especially for free. This is a really cool, versatile plugin that you can do a lot with.